warm welcome to all of you and the panelists here today. While we are the penultimate panel, but this is going to be the ultimate solution for us to realize our targets in solar. We have been hearing from utility, manufacturing, green hydrogen, but there is one sector that has always been underrated and overlooked when it comes to the proliferation, which is the distributed sector. The matter of fact remains that our out of 100 gigawatt of target for 2022 in solar, 60 gigawatt was for utility and 40 gigawatt was for rooftop and distributed. We have done exceptionally well in the utility front, but we fell short by 90% in the distributed sector. But that's not the end of the story. When you look at the outlook, we see a light at the end of the tunnel or ray of hope, one very much intended, that the utility scale sector, while it will get saturated by 26-27, it is the time for the distributed sector, including rooftop and open access, that will capture the larger chunk of India's market. So today in this discussion, I would like to get insights and inputs from our panelists on how they see the segment, what are the impediments that they think are standing between us and realizing the target, and finally, what is the scope for the sector. And the panel is very well constructed. We have the representation from government, from the sector, industry, and of course the key players of the industry and from the consultancy also. So maybe I'll start with the government side of opinion. Mr. Janaiah is here, Vice Chairman and MD of TS Redco. Sir, Telangana has been at the forefront of India's renewable energy story. They are number 4 in the country. In solar, they are number 6. So where do you see the role of C&I, rooftop, distributed solar in Telangana's energy journey and energy plans for 2030?
Yeah, very good evening to all. And first of all, let me thank you, organizers, for giving me an opportunity to say about the state of Telangana. Of course, Telangana is the first state to have the decentralized solar policy in the year 2016. And now we have already crossed about 6 gigawatts. And under the rooftop sector also more than 350 megawatts we have crossed. And since 4.5 years, we have been aggressively progressing towards the achievement of the target whatever given by the government of India. And the sector needs a lot of other aspects like open access and also the DISCOM support in implementing the rooftop and also the various subsidiary incentives which will be varied one state to one state among the integrators, which is causing some sort of difficulty, which now already been solved by the MOP by calling for the national portal and various aspects looking into the rooftop sector. Definitely, Telangana is in forefront in dealing with all this decentralized mode, and also in future we want to have the same phenomena for future goals of the achieved target by 2030.
Thank you, sir, for taking us through Telangana's plans. Maybe I will now go to Yuvaraj Dinesh Babuji, who has been an integral part of the sector, if I can say. You've seen how the last 8 years of our journey in solar has been. You've been closely associated with the rooftop sector. What do you think are the biggest hits and the biggest misses that we have seen? And is there any way we can learn from that so that we will not miss the hit for 2030?
Thanks, Subbu. Is it working, right? So I think you are always famous to put me on the spot. You never said that you're going to ask me this question. but I will try my level best to answer that question. I think the hits and misses are the same, actually. I think the co-panel will also agree that what we are seeing as a kind of a policy and the regulatory challenge is the biggest miss, I would say. Either the private sector couldn't decipher it on time, or the regulators and the policymakers couldn't understand how the market is moving. So I think it was the biggest hit and biggest miss, because we saw a few success of those same regulations and policies being adopted in few states and trying to kind of maneuver the way they could and then give a best signal to the market to move. Many states missed it because they couldn't really understand how best they can take advantage of the kind of direction which the government of India from the central is giving to them. So I would say the same, kind of the same reason created this hit and miss. In terms of the finance, it has been a great story, how the country has evolved in understanding and financing the rooftop solar, which otherwise was a kind of a black box. And the way we see today the consumer products being financed, we would like to see the residential rooftop solar, for example, to be a kind of an Amazon product where you can just order online and then get it done, like your cable TV or the dish antenna, for example. It has evolved dramatically for the last decade, I would say, especially in the last 4 to 5 years. And we see that the kind of new efforts by the World Bank as well as the ADB again to plow back almost close to around $650 million in the next few months, exclusively for the residential sector. I think that's the biggest hit in terms of how the sector waited enough for getting a financing product for the residential sector, because the retail sector was the one which got the heaviest hit. But the last 1 year, I would say that the residential sector is getting its due attention. We have moved away from L1, and then we have tried to see how a national level like the national portal could take some kind of a, I would say, the best way forward. I'm not saying it is now at 100% efficiency in terms of the expectations that we had on the national portal, but it's a great way forward. So that's another kind of a hit and miss where we missed the financing aspect of it at the early stage, but now we have caught up to the speed. That's the second one. Slightly on the same note, I would say the kind of MSME financing aspect, definitely my friend Upendra will talk about it aspect. I believe he would touch it, it's most favorite subject. There also we have missed the boat in terms of how we could have narrated a wonderful story for the MSMEs pre-COVID and post-COVID for the rooftop solar to make a very commercial sense for them to be more competitive both domestically and internationally. But now I think we have moved forward from that phase to create the guarantee instruments and create the kind of confidence on the NBFCs to expose themselves more to MSME financing. The last but not the least is that even today we feel a great segment of the outreach, the capacity building, the awareness is still taken for granted. People believe that, okay, now rooftop solar everybody understands. The answer is no. Very few understand. Who get the hit, they understand that yes, now I have to move to some solution which will make me competitive. Many MSMEs don't even have access to such information. So at least I'm extremely happy that Subbu is doing a lot of outreach in each and every state to carry the message forward. So I think these are the areas I feel that we have come a long way, Subbu. And therefore the answers are hit and miss on all these areas, but we have learnt a lot. But I don't think we should lose that momentum. It is very, very important. If we want to become net zero or we want to achieve the first NDC by 2030, rooftop solar is the most important part which we shouldn't miss, especially the story which I just heard from Sir in Telangana in terms of reducing the cross subsidy, becoming the tool for promoting rooftop solar, a wonderful story which you will hear very frequently moving forward from each and every state. Thanks, Subbu.
Thank you very much for that. I think what underlying message that we can take away from what you said is that the commoditization of rooftop solar has not happened yet, and that is the main propeller for mass scale adoption. Maybe taking cue from you, I will go to Mr. Bhatt from cKinetics. Mr. Bhatt, we all are aware MSMEs are backbone of our country, but unfortunately their involvement in the distributed solar sector has not been to the extent that we have expected them to. Why do you think it was, and how much role does financing play in that particular aspect of them shying away or not building enough appetite for distributed solar?
Yeah, no, thank you for that question. I think just as we are saying distributed solar and in particular rooftop is perhaps the biggest pivot for enabling our NDC goals, in my view, you can't meet those numbers without necessarily tapping into the SME opportunity on that. I think that's almost a given. Having said it, I think the way we have been approaching this has always been, I think, in a very conventional manner. And the problem with that approach always has been we have expected that the SME owner will necessarily own these installations. Now that works partly where there are great business cases, there is surplus capital, etc., etc. But by and large, business owners will prioritize capital for their business rather than on a bottom line improvement product. That too where the payback is 3 to 7 years. I mean, even with the best of the AD situations, you'll have a 3 to 4 year payback, most often 7 years. So that's one aspect. The second aspect is many of the conventional SME clusters haven't necessarily been future-proof for the roofs. So there is not just a question of acquiring that installation, it is about how do you make sure that the installation is future-proof to fully deliver on the yield that is expected out of that. I think there were 2-3 areas, if I go back to your theme of hits and misses, where I think we kind of missed the opportunity in addressing it equitably. One is in terms of we have tried to make the capital available but not accessible. And what I mean by that is we have tried to just think that cost of capital is the driver. The question is when a bank or a financier is looking at it, they are looking at credit history, they are looking at, even if it is a you're only financing on the basis of the asset and not a broader collateral, you like to look at how do you ring fence the cash flow on this? Or how do you kind of make sure that you can tap into a revenue stream of the person? So the expected direction would have been a lot of RESCO installations for at least 100 kilowatt and above installations would have made the sense. And ideally, one should have created more risk mitigation approaches to enable RESCOs to tap into that opportunity. There's a credit guarantee structure. Dinesh is aware of this. It took us, 3 years, Dinesh, to finally get it off the ground. And I think the solution was known to anybody who saw that segment way back in 2016. I think the theme paper on that I wrote in 2016 for the ministry. And we gave them a model, a committee was set up, but it finally took us 3.5 years. And so we can keep on talking about it, but unless we kind of make it accessible, we will always have that challenge. The last bit on this, in my view, is we keep on looking at the broader opportunity of distributed in context of the demand. But if you really look at it also in context of the operating environment, unless you try and integrate it or with the DISCOM reform, at least on these fundamentals, and you have to take a view on what the DISCOM of the future would be. So rather than DISCOM being continuously planned as the universal service provider, it should swivel towards provider of the last resort. That is, I think, the direction regulatorily and policy-wise we have to follow to truly allow this to happen at scale. It will happen on its own due course, but in a very reluctant fashion, and it will be a pain for all the service providers, frankly, otherwise.
Well, excellently put. I think, when it comes to accessibility and affordability, accessibility trumps the affordability, and I think that, like you rightly outlined, is one of the key reasons why we could not achieve as much as we wanted to. Now let's look at the other dimension of this thing. While residential side we have performed not so up to the mark, there is the C&I side where we have considerably performed better on a relative basis. Out of the 7 odd gigawatt of non-utility scale, 80% comes from the C&I segment, which is not so surprising, but it could have been much more. So maybe I will direct my next question to both Maniji and Kartik on what do you think are the impediments for us that is stopping us to scale up the C&I market, especially on the open access front. Today, we have, I think, by far the best enabling policy on the central level anyone can ever dream of. But why is it not getting translated on the ground? Maybe if you can go first and then.
Thank you, Subbu, for that excellent question. I think the reason why, or the impediments that we see in the open access side is that every state operates in a very different model. And the key impediment is the interpretation of the existing law. The policy is there, the law is there, but it is being interpreted at the convenience of a particular state DISCOM in the way they would want to see. Let's take the example of, say, what is captive consumer or a captive customer, a captive project. Captive project is defined very clearly in the Act, 26% equity of the project and 51% of the offtake of the power. But when you get to the implementation of it, one particular state will interpret it as not 26% of equity, but the entire 100% of power has to be offtaken, and 26% of equity means 26% of the project cost. Now we are seeing this being played out in multiple states, a couple of states. I don't want to name the state, but we all are aware of the state. Now, if you see the growth of the C&I open access in those states, it's not happening at all. There is another state that we all know of where the open access rules are there. It has been adopted by the state, but there is no DISCOM connectivity being made available. Now, there's a huge demand from the customers who are all wanting to drive green because of their own compulsions. A lot of them at the board level have commitments made to the global boards to go green. Second, there are customers who are part of the RE100 program. They want to go green, but they can't go green because there is no option available to them to go green. While they can put up rooftop projects, which we talked about earlier, it's a good start. But even there are impediments where people have actually put up rooftop projects in the past. Even though that requirement, it was meeting only part of the requirement. Now, when they take an open access project to increase their RE penetration in their energy mix, they have another problem. They will now the old project will now move into sort of gross metering or gross billing instead of net metering. We are seeing that in the state of Maharashtra. Having said that, it may be driven by billing related issues and software related matters that the DISCOM must be facing. So I'm sympathetic to why they do that, but that is not solving the problem. So if I have made an investment or a contract with a third-party provider of power, say 3 years ago, which is sort of a 25-year contract, now I need more power, but I have to now take that power from an open access source. Now my rooftop project goes into gross billing, so I have a shortfall in my economic savings. So these are challenges that are there, and there are many such challenges. And sometimes even in rooftop projects, we come across challenges like grid support charges that keep being talked about, implemented in various forms, various ways. Also, we have seen in some states, because see, the issue really is that what are these private IPP providers doing? They are effectively targeting the customers in the C&I market, which is their business. But effectively, they are also the high-paying customers for the DISCOMs, and they don't want to lose that customer base. So there is an intrinsic disruption of the incumbent model, which we've seen across multiple sectors. Having said that, the DISCOM-related problems need to be sorted out. I'm sympathetic to their cause, but that is not helping the growth of the C&I market as it should. And the next impediment, the bigger impediment also we see is that what is in the policy, what translates into procedures, what translates into on-the-ground action, they may be all very different. There can be a small procedural tool that can hold up things for many months. We have seen this in the case of UP as well, creating a generator code, working, you've got a plant installed in August, but you will get the power only from, say, November or December, and that if you're lucky, because you'll have to demonstrate that 15 days your plant is operating at the stated capacity, which is okay if you end up doing it in a nice weather season. But if you end up installing it or commissioning it in a winter month, you will be in trouble. So, these are impediments which I think are not required, because if a plant is commissioned full capacity, it passes the PR test, it's working, it should just be allowed to pass. I don't understand the logic. Of course, we all know why it happens. Maybe it's not deliberate, maybe it's just done to support or prevent misuse by certain players possibly, but that's how the regulations end up being. And I'm just wanting to be very straight on this. I'm not wanting to be diplomatic here. There are challenges. I think DISCOMs are also working to help the C&I customers, but it is the sort of examples are far and few. Like if you see states like Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, they're pretty forefront in the renewable penetration. So a lot of capital and projects are going into those states. Now, there is also a limit how much that states can take. So obviously, developers also want to move into new states. And I think the states should welcome that policy and it should help them. My view is about the DISCOMs is that if they actually see these developers or IPPs as a, as a co-partner rather than as a competitor, then I think the whole strategy will change, because it's not about the economics or the saving. People are willing to pay money, but at the end of the day, it's about ease of doing business. And if we can fix that, that's great. And we're looking at the trends are tremendous, because if you see, there are customers who are exporting products outside of India. They have supply side pressures from their customers who want them to go green. Otherwise, they won't be able to sell their products in the export market. So there are real issues. How do they go green? I mean, unless the DISCOMs then come back and say that we'll charge you a 65 paise or 70 paise green charge, but that is on the base charge, not on the price at which they procure green power. Now that ends up becoming very expensive, which brutally kills their basic business, which they can't do. So these are the challenges one needs to address if you want to grow. I think it's happening, but it's taking a bit longer. Thank you.
Maybe Mr. Kartikeya, from your side.
Right. So, hi. So, Subbu, I think the CNI market, right, and money actually, thank you for pointing out all the challenges that do exist, and we all know that power, the way it is, the regulatory structure is made in India, we see that there is positive intent from the center, and we see that reflected in initiatives such as the GOAR, right? And then we see intention also from certain states like Karnataka, who come out, who adopt in the best possible spirit of what the center says, and we see industry also growing there. But I'm gonna take slightly rewind and also put in perspective the rooftop discussion that we were having, because I believe that CNI is the true vehicle, I believe, to actually take us to the 500 gigawatt target by 2030, right? Because when we talk CNI, we are talking about corporations which are rational, right? And there is a global thought process which kind of trickles down to the corporations in India, right? And we know that globally corporations have sworn to get rid of their carbon footprint one way or another: solar, wind, battery, carbon sequestration. These are all conversations which have been led by corporations and then by governments, right? So we know that the CNI sector, if the regulations are made standardized, right, there is predictability in the way they can take decisions. They will take those decisions, and they will take those decisions faster than the government can. And I believe the speed at which the CNI sector can actually reach, let's say, the first 100 gigawatts of deployed renewable energy capacity has the potential to beat the speed at which the utility sector has actually reached that. And I truly hope that this is the decade in which we actually cross that milestone. So with that thought, I would say that, the most amazing thing that I've seen over the last 10 years is that rooftop started very early, 2011-12. I think rooftops are still already being installed at large scale, 100, 200 kilowatt. Whereas open access only came in at around 2018, right? Karnataka being the first state. And it took rooftop to get to around 6 gigawatts, I think a full 10 years. Whereas open access, if you put wind and solar together, we are at what, almost 20 gigawatts? Yeah, something between 18 and 20. So that's almost 3x in half the time, right? So I do believe that the numbers tell us that open access is the way to go for CNI to decarbonize in a big way, which is a global agenda, and is guaranteed to put us on the fast track to reach our targets, right? So with that, I believe right now is a very, very interesting time to be in the CNI, because we do these exercises, right, where we try and size up demand. So what we see is that CNI solar, open access specifically, is one of those sectors where supply is actually trying to catch up with demand, right? Big time. If the demand today, in my assessment, if all industries in India, big and small, want to transition, let's say 20% to renewable energy because it's cheaper, they've got a goal and so on, the demand would be somewhere close to 100 gigawatts, whereas we are at 20. So we are at around 20% of penetration. That is severely under penetration, right, in the market. And so that is why I believe it's a great time to be in the CNI market. But yes, having said all that, there is an obstacle course, right? You have to go through the obstacle course. But then again, all good things, come with time and with their challenges. But I think as a country, state by state, we've seen Karnataka lead it. We've seen Tamil Nadu follow. We've seen Maharashtra set an example. We've seen a state like Uttar Pradesh, which I come from Uttar Pradesh. And I've never really, people have not really ever been very ecstatic in terms of UP being a state as an industrial leader or a thought leader and so on in those development metrics. But look at the way they've actually scaled open access. They've done a great job. And with ISTS coming in, I think that is the next stage of evolution for CNI renewable energy deployment. And really looking forward to how that plays out. And Subbu and I had a very interesting conversation just before this. But yeah, that is where I would rest my case.
No, I agree. We have to run through the obstacle course to get the final prize at the end of the finish line. But the remaining 12 minutes, I would like to focus now on the future. I mean, we have heard about hits, misses, what happened, what went wrong. But now let's focus on what we look at, the future and what is the outlook for. Maybe I'll start with Mr. Janaiah. Sir, Telangana is the fastest growing industrial state in the country. So for a state like Telangana, what is the role of solar, especially in the CNI and open access sector that you see? And how can it be more lucrative so that can be used as an option to lure more investors and industries to the state?
Yeah, actually, we want to have 4 industrial green corridor zones in and around Hyderabad. Already 2 are identified, and 50% of the industrial stakeholders already came forward to go for the renewable energy. And we are in touch with the MSME sector in the local, and also in touch with the SBI and PNB, so that whatever the financing mechanism or else RESCO mode, whatever may be the method, but we have to go into the green corridor zone is our primary task. And all the 4 corners of the Hyderabad, let us have at least one industrial corridor as a green corridor zone. SME sector should have one industrial green corridor zone. We are planning in such a way. Definitely C&I will play crucial role for the, as our co-panel speakers said, definitely to achieve the target, C&I is only the alternative. Rooftop under domestic sector, very meager loads. But when it comes to the C&I, definitely we will have minimum 50 to 100 kilowatt loads on each sector. That is the sector where we have to catch up, and we have to see that we have to involve all the stakeholders in a proper way, and we have lot of planning for the melas so that all the industrial stakeholders and MSME sector and industry people and also the bankers comes together and have a proper mechanism so that we can achieve our target.
Sir, it's very encouraging to see states take an initiative in the form of green industry corridors. I think that will go a long way to give confidence to the developers and industry to come and invest in the state. Shifting the discussion to another futuristic topic, which is not so futuristic now, it has become part and parcel of the discussion, that's on the storage front. Dinesh Babuji, you have seen, Rooftop as a residential unit. How does the outlook for a residential rooftop plus storage look for you? It might be too utopian for me to ask that to you, but do you see a place for it in our energy mix in the coming days, and storage as a driving factor for people to shift to rooftop?
Yeah, that's definitely a good question, I would say, but I think it's like in the works. I would like to keep that in works for quite some time, though it's a great solution. But in terms of even having a basic access to without storage itself is a big question now for the residential sector. The affordability, the feasibility, and all that stuff is still under question. Gujarat put the residential rooftop solar on the map, whether you like it or not. It did. The gigawatt story of Gujarat is the story for the residential sector in the country as of now. Things may change tomorrow, as I mentioned to you, where governments are going to come forward and take the journey of the rooftop solar for the residential sector for all known reasons. But storage is a bit away right now. I won't say it's a luxury, but I don't think you have a case now to really push it as a program. But having said that, at EY, we have just now started this exercise along with the USAID to create those business models that would help understand whether, for example, Haryana, just an example, we have started that study just now. We kick-started today afternoon at 2 p.m. The kind of understanding of how the residential sector for the rooftop solar would kind of behave with storage. What would be the kind of a policy enablers that would help that to happen? The pilot may be a failure, that's fine, but we learned something out of it. There are so many case studies across the world, but India has none on the residential sector. So it is better to see how that works and then see whether a kind of a program that could be rolled out along with the current rooftop solar program with storage for the country. We saw a strong case in the last 5 years when we worked in the 7 northeastern states that storage is going to be a huge enabler for them. There are many rooftop solar projects in the Northeast that are not functioning properly with the MNRE program many years ago. And there are a lot of requests by them to install storage for them. So we had done a good background study, but if you ask me whether that is going to be the immediate future, I would have my own doubts. I won't bet on it right now. But the story is happening. It's going to take its own pace. But yeah, that is the next to kind of look upon.
Very, very interesting. Maybe let us shift the narrative now from residential to C&I. Maybe we can start with Kartikeya. So we have seen like the growing need of the industrial nation like us. Companies want reliable energy solutions. So given an example of RE100 company, that means they want 100% RE. So how do you see that particular market space evolve? Like, do you see solar plus wind plus storage, or solar and wind, or maybe open access with pump storage, which already a couple of corporates are already doing it? So how do you see that segment evolving because of the demand in that solutions?
Right. Absolutely. Thank you, Subbu. So I think for the RE100, right, and I was just running some numbers before this, and I saw that globally we have around 100 gigawatts of commercial PPA, right? CAPEX aside, commercial PPAs are around 100 gigawatts globally. Almost 70 gigawatt of that comes from RE100 committed companies, and the top RE100 committed companies, that's basically your Amazons and Apples and Microsofts and Meta, of the world. And the definition of RE100 there is more of, buying or financing equivalent amount of RE100. And that's because I believe that solar and wind together with banking can work, for sure. And I think solar and wind with banking is less of a strain on the grid as compared to solar alone with banking or wind alone with banking, because wind you need at least like quarterly or 2 quarterly banking to really go RE100 with wind alone. And solar, I think with monthly banking you can do, but they won't never let you go like 100%, which also makes sense, right? I mean, the system provider needs to make needs to supply some power. So I think in the Indian context, going RE100 today is a complex question, and there is no clear answer as of right now. But I believe that storage, from a behind the meter perspective, could actually help industries reach close to the RE100 goal. And from what people are thinking about across the globe, a lot of behind the meter storage can actually be used to manage demand response, right? So the demand response problem, which is a key problem for utilities in India today, has its solution somewhere in behind the meter storage, which could be residential, which could be C&I. C&I would be the lower hanging fruit because you could deploy more and basically dictate better. Those are more organized sectors, so they can actually respond to those kind of calls from the SLDC. So I think something like that is where it would go, but it's very difficult to say that what would really work.
Maniji, have you seen an increasing trend from the C&I consumers for the demand of a firm and dispatchable power? Or if not now, do you see it coming up, and how can the industry get used to it?
So as I said, I think it's a very good question. I think the future of the CIDA market will be more and more driven by ability to provide sort of firmer power. I would not say entirely 100% renewable energy today, but that will change 3-5 years down the road. Now, there are many ways of achieving it, as I think my colleague Kartikeya mentioned here. So one is of course solar, wind, and from the demand perspective, yes, the market is asking for that. But those are people who already have a significant penetration in their energy mix from RE. There's a whole host of industry which is not even there in terms of even 10% of their requirement. So that's one segment which is still not thinking about 100% firm power. There is a segment that is thinking, which is reached 60, 70% or 50%. They are thinking next step because they have reaped the benefits of this and tasted the blood, so they want to like to do more. And for various reasons, including the economic saving plus the drive towards becoming greener and sometimes supply chain related pressures which I talked about earlier. So there are various reasons why people are doing it, and the demand does exist. Now, will all the demand come from this firm power? No. I think there is a huge market that is not even scratch the top of the iceberg, right? So we just need to do a lot more work there. The market will grow. But the ones which are more mature, the top names that RE100 names that he talked about, yes, those guys are looking at innovative products. Now the way to do it is you could supply physical power, 100% renewable. You could supply, say, 50%, 70% physical power. Some is then taken up through virtual PPAs, or some is done through REC mechanisms. So there are various ways people are trying to achieve their RE100 goals. It's not necessarily always 100%. Like I can give an example. If there is a large company which is into distribution or a dealership spread across, say, 300 outlets all over the country. Now, each of their consumption point, I mean, suppose, for example, there's a showroom. They have large showrooms of, say, 300 or 500. Could be any product, machine parts, distributorship, whatever. They want to go green. How can they go green? Because each consumer point is not even 1 megawatt. Under the open access, you can't do. Of course, the new rules of Green Energy Open Access allows you to do 100 kW, but that is not yet happened. It's a policy which is good, needs to translate it to state. Now, will every state adopt it? We don't know. Or maybe adopt it over time. We need to wait and see. So what happens to these kind of companies? They want to give this solution to their dealerships or their own dealerships. They can't do it. So they will have to meet the requirement through some other mechanism. Yes, their main factories, they may be able to reach 60%, 70%, maybe then mix it with VPPA, mix it with some REC. They'll try to achieve that. But it's not as straight as it appears to be. So it's a path. And to the earlier point about battery storage or any other form of storage, yes, if you're looking at ISTS solution, then you combine storage with, say, wind and solar. It is the best solution. But storage need not necessarily be only battery storage. It could be like what you said, the pump hydro storage, which may be most effective from a cost perspective today. But then how many of them can really do that? Because not all the consumer loads are very high. And it's not that, not all of them are connected to CTU. So a lot of them will be at STU, they will still pay for the charges, and then the economics comes into play. So there are a lot of challenges there, but I think if the intent is there, if you go towards a 100 kW model, KVA model for the open access, green open access, and if it gets percolated to the state level, then there's a larger hope of moving closer to the 100% goal. I mean, therefore, innovation in products, the exchange market, which we talked about, which was there earlier, all of this will have a role to play. So it is not just one solution of physical delivery, but you need that, but you also need plus things. Thank you.
Thank you for those insights. Moving on to Mr. Bhatt, we've spoken about technologies and integration, but the key element still remains finance. So what do you see the role of innovative financing models that can help us get closer to achieving our distributed solar targets, especially in the C&I and residential sector.
Yeah, on a lighter note, since the question came up as the time's up, it just tells me how serious we are about solving the financing problem. But that's just in a lighter note. I think there is I think room for financing innovation at 4 levels to unlock this problem, right? One, I think the RESCO markets needs to be enabled with both financing lines backed by credit mitigation tools to tap into the SME sector. I think for the RE100 companies, that may not be that much of, but their extended supply chains, all of them are going to be hit by what my colleagues were talking about, primarily driven by the EU mandate of carbon border adjustment mechanism, etc. So that's one. I think the second thing is you should, and this is based on our experience with the banks, both Dinesh and I have been working with the largest banks in this country last 6-7 years. I think that's a great way to start. The elephant needs to move. But I think getting co-financing and co-lending lines through the NBFCs is almost a critical ingredient, because a lot of these places require contextual understanding that's here, and many of them have some ongoing equipment financing businesses, etc. So that's the second. I think the third financing innovation, in my view, which is almost imperative, is can we start looking at what is the value of these assets? Because when you kind of want to have an ambition, as Dinesh was saying, maybe make it like a product financing, you then need to look at it, okay, is there a marketplace for resale? Is there which is not so easy in a project context. And the downside of that financing is, but if you more miniature the project size and rooftop, more critical is that innovation. So we will see some marketplaces. I am aware of at least 2 distinct marketplace launches which will happen in the next 6 to 12 months in this country, backed by some of the largest global investors. The question is, will their dry powder kind of disappear before we get everything right and get to the time's up, or do we get our act right? So those are some of the quick reflections.
Thank you very much for throwing a light, even though the time was up, on different models on how the financing will evolve. I think we had a very, very insightful discussion, and I really and thoroughly enjoyed your inputs. And the underlying conclusion is very clear. While India is the place and at the center of the global energy transition, the story of distributed solar has just begun. Picture abhi baki hai, and we are going to see a huge quantums of capacity getting added in India, especially when we are at the precipice, or a very own precipice, of transitioning from a government-driven demand to a market-driven demand. And that's where we'll truly become the largest country in the world in terms of installed capacity. Thank you very much, Dinesh ji, Janaiah ji, Upendra ji, Mr. Kartikeya and Mani ji, and really enjoyed it. And thank you very much to ETEnergyWorld again for giving us this opportunity.